All right, I think we're ready to start. Just want to say hello to everybody and welcome. Thanks for joining today. Before we dive into conversation, we're going to have Lauren just go over a couple of housekeeping items. We want to make sure that the dialogue is interactive, and she'll direct you to how to jump in with comments or questions as we go. Lauren?
Thanks, Courtney. Thank you everyone for coming. I'm Lauren, and throughout the presentation, we're going to be giving you an opportunity to ask questions. Please pop that into the Q&A. If you have comments or concerns, because I know they're going to ask you if you have any, please also put that in the chat. We will be monitoring both. So if you accidentally switch it up, it's no problem. We will get to it and make sure that we are able to address it in some way. So thank you, and I'm going to kick it off to Luke.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Lauren. And, usually I like to start off by saying it's great seeing everybody, but we can't see you, but we see that you're here. So Courtney, it's great seeing you. Always good to have these conversations together. And thank you all for tuning in to this webinar. And Courtney and I talked a lot about what this webinar should look like. And what we talked about was we want this to be an hour that is impactful for you. Everybody is so busy right now, and we know that your time is valuable. So if you want more details on our backgrounds and our bios and all that great stuff, you can, go to LinkedIn, or you can go to our websites, and, you get our emails and things like that. You can find out all the information you want. So we will not waste your time by getting into that. What we do want to share, though, is the way in which, very briefly, our backgrounds lend themselves to having this conversation around a curriculum. Because as you all know, so many organizations, so many companies have entered this name, image, and likeness space because of the opportunity. And, for us, we didn't build this curriculum based on name, image, and likeness. This is work that we've been doing for years in our respective work that we've done professionally. So Courtney, having spent 25 years on Wall Street and understanding finance and money and the impact that new money has on athletes and other young individuals, my time of working with athletes as a non-agent sports lawyer, I've seen the transition of athletes and when they've gone from college into the pros and not understanding things like endorsement, contracts or marketing agreements. They don't understand what an agent is always asking them to sign as part of the agent's agreement. And it's that kind of work that we've been doing for years that has really helped us to say, how do we conform this education that we know is so critically important for athletes? How do we conform that to this name, image, and likeness space? And so that's what you're going to hear more about today is what does that curriculum look like as a way to protect your student athletes through education?
Thanks, Luke. I think it's really important. It's funny, I was reading, we'll talk a little bit about her later, but Chloe Mitchell, the first student athlete to benefit from name, image, and likeness, as she's in the NAIA. But it was interesting, one of the articles written about her talks about all the companies that have popped up specifically to help with name, image, and likeness. So I do think it's critical to make sure everybody understands this is, we've been here and we tailored our experience and expertise to a college curriculum, and then we just advanced it for name, image, and likeness purposes. I also want to make sure that everybody understands that we are completely unbiased. I started the company, I released all of my management investment licenses so that I could bring my expertise, but not have any other motivation other than helping the student athletes and helping schools mitigate their risk. And just like you, Luke, while you are the head of the sports law practice at Porter Wright, you are a non-agent attorney. So your clients come to you for exactly that piece, that unbiased expert lawyer opinion, where you're just looking at this contract and giving feedback. So I think that's really important. And then finally, we're platform agnostic. I think, if we can pull up the slide real quick, I can show sort of how we view the full picture of NIL. And, we've had a lot of conversation, obviously, in the branding space and how to monetize those brands. And, that piece is critical because we want to make sure these student athletes are able to build those brands responsibly and in a way that's not going to distract them from being a student and an athlete. We typically talk a lot about it, and Luke and I feel strongly we need to bring in the other pieces to make sure that your student athletes are getting the complete solution. So protective education, which is what we're focusing on today, is critical. And it plugs in everywhere. I think most importantly to understand it's necessary for now, regardless of what the regulations look like. We teach via workshop, and then we have ongoing micro-learning modules. And those modules can be on our app that we bring to the school, or we can plug in to a different platform. So just want to make sure that everybody understands that our goal is to make sure we're bringing the best comprehensive solution to your student athletes. So we will work with whatever tools you're already using and make sure we're complementing them and not doing any kind of duplicative efforts. So with that in mind, and just sort of understanding, we view education as this overarching piece. We need to start it now, no matter what the regulations are going to look like, and we need to keep coming back to it and reinforcing the concepts. So Luke, with that, if you wouldn't mind jumping right into what our education and our curricula looks like.
Absolutely. So the last thing that I'll say is I want to just reinforce, as Lauren mentioned earlier, if you have questions along the way, if you have comments, please feel free to put those in the chat, put those in the Q&A, because we want this to be an effective use of your time and you receiving the information that you want. And the last thing I'll say, because this is a question that we get a lot, which is, okay, Anomaly, Team Altemus, Luke, Courtney, kind of how does that all work? Because we believe in this education, we have come together to develop this curricula that really does bring our areas of expertise together. So when we get done with this webinar, if you have questions, it doesn't matter whether you call Courtney, whether you call me or email either one of us, because we just believe in this independent, objective, curriculum that really is focused on protecting athletes through education. So hopefully that helps you understand, before any of those questions, that we're in this together in developing and delivering this education. So with that, we can get into the education. One point that I'll highlight before we do is that, again, we love having this conversation, right? We've been talking about name, image, and likeness, and we've been talking about the education piece for quite some time now, because at the end of the day, we've seen, unfortunately, the challenges that come when athletes don't have the education or understand what it is that they're signing. I know many of you have seen what happens when those things take place. And so we just want to shout from the mountaintop how important education is. And regardless of the timeline of regulations and whether those regulations come from the NCAA, from Congress, as things get pushed back, we want to make sure that you don't allow that to shorten the runway that you have of realizing that this education is so critically important to your student athletes. And so what we're going to share in this curriculum of DDMC is how important it is to have a repeatable, systematic process that your student athletes can apply beyond their sport, right? This is an intentional, lifelong process. And you'll hear that through each of the 4 stages. You'll hear how the particular education in that area will help your student athletes beyond just name, image, and likeness. But we're gonna share with you the impact that it will have on them as it relates to name, image, and likeness. And you'll also hear how all of these different pieces come together. That is not just siloed in the sense of it's just this, and then you have to forget everything to focus on that. These pieces really do fit together, and you'll see that. So with that, let's get into this first piece. And the first piece of DDMC is decision-making. Decision-making is really critically important when you think about all of the life skills that you are already trying to instill and teach to your student athletes. It's almost like the foundation of any of those areas. So if you're having conversations on healthy relationships, on time management, financial management, on all of those aspects that you try to instill in your student athletes, everything starts with a decision. And so when we're thinking about this, it's so important to have a defined process for making decisions. And it's unique because with our student athletes, they have often been it's been ingrained in them to make split-second decisions. So in their sport, no matter what their sport is, they realize that they need to gather information and make a decision quickly, oftentimes in a split second. But we don't take the time sometimes to slow that process down and help them understand what's actually happening so that then they can apply that to the other decisions that they have to make outside of their sport. So what we've come up with and what we've worked on with various organizations, from the NCAA and their elite symposia to the NBA, NFL teams, athletic departments, we've had this conversation around the athlete decision-making process, helping student athletes understand that repeatable process. So if we think about it in terms of name, image, and likeness, there are a lot of decisions that are going to come the way of your student athletes. And so we want to make sure that they have a process to deal with that. And that process focuses on reap. It's this idea that you reap what you sow. So what you put into this decision-making process, that's what they're going to get back out of it. So first it's recognizing a decision, right? So it's recognizing that there's a decision that has to be made. And then it's evaluating information. So, okay, now that I've decided what it is that I'm actually deciding to do or not do, now I need to start evaluating information. I need to gather that information so that I can evaluate what's going on here. Then I can move into analyzing my options. And I want to be able to analyze the various options that I have so that I can ultimately produce a result. And I'll focus real briefly on the E and the A. And that evaluating information and analyzing options, that's where they realize, and we ingrain in them, that's where they can start to seek outside help, right? So oftentimes when a student athlete has a decision to be made, if they just turn to a classmate, a coach, or someone else, and they say, hey, I'm deciding as to whether I should go to graduate school or go, enter the working world when I graduate. Oftentimes, if they just ask somebody that, kind of out of the blue, the response is going to be colored by that person's experiences and what they've seen with other student athletes. But if that athlete has said, okay, I've started to evaluate some information. Here's what I'm looking at in terms of my options, and now I'm analyzing these options, and I need your assistance in helping me analyze these options. Now they're getting a response from someone that can be very tailored to the decision they have to make. So when we think about this for name, image, and likeness, there are going to be a lot of decisions around whether or not I should take on certain opportunities, whether or not I should work with certain people. How do I manage my time? And when you start to think about that, having a repeatable process is helpful for them as they make a decision and helpful for you as you look to encourage them through a process as opposed to advising them on what they should or shouldn't do because of all the ramifications that come with that. So being able to enforce a process helps make sure that they are protected as they're going through and making an informed decision. But that then leads to the due diligence. So now that they have a process for making a decision, now they need to think about how do I start to apply it in due diligence. And with that, Courtney, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Luke. That E and the A, the evaluate and analyze, obviously that's basically what due diligence is. When we work with student athletes, we find that most of them don't even understand the term due diligence when they come in. And obviously the overarching term we're used to more in the context of performing due diligence on a specific deal, a specific investment idea, a partnership, those types of things. But again, back to that process piece, we teach the process of due diligence primarily around filtering any professional service providers or third parties that they might work with. So they learn the term due diligence, they put it into practice. It's a furthering of the practice of REAP, of that decision-making process, and they know to apply it later in life for any major decisions. So when it comes time to make investment decisions, or a decision about going to work for somebody or hiring somebody, again, they learn it for life. So we help them with that definition. We specifically, again, focus in this part of the education on those third parties. So we're so used to seeing these student athletes. You know, Luke mentioned the Elite Symposium. Both of us have worked with the elite football players and the men's basketball players prior to their final season to get them ready for that transition. And one of the things we talk about before we even mention the word money is managing the onslaught of all the inbound calls and inquiries. Now, that's such a tiny piece of the population of student athletes. We now have to teach every one of those student athletes how to manage that onslaught, because we know people will come out of the woodwork. So that's where we start. We define advisors, define their roles, help them decide who they need to hire. And then obviously, as you all know, when a student athlete enters their activity into ultimately whatever the compliance platform is that you choose to use, they have to enter information about the third parties. So they'll learn as they're entering that information that they need to be analyzing and making decision about who's right for them to work with. When we do workshops with them, we work on them not just with concepts, but also we get them going into mock interviews. We get them to understand what the implications are of this decision. And most important, once they've chosen somebody to work with, how to monitor that person as they go along. When they're trying to decide to work with companies or LLCs, anybody who might want to hire them, we do give them an introduction to sort of checking out the corporate structure and how to think about that. But they have a lot coming at them, and a lot of the professional service providers tell a really great story. And a lot of them are very competent. They may just not be as familiar with not only an athlete, but a student athlete, and a student athlete who has two full-time jobs, being a student and an athlete. So once they've chosen the third parties and they move into actually doing an activity, we want to make sure that we cover the next piece of the education, the M in the DDMC. And when we talk about this, we think about, sorry, before we get to the M, I just want to go back to the due diligence. This is sort of how we think of that cycle. Again, the ongoing life lesson, teaching them to protect, making sure that they're monitoring, and if something comes up, look into it and then remediate to make sure that they can get back on track. So sorry, Luke, now we'll go to money. You know, we talk about, we work with student athletes obviously now. And when we go in and do workshops pre-COVID on campus and now virtually, when we're dealing with a group of a football team, like in this example, football team that, you know, most of the players are full scholarship, we get into goal setting and budgeting exercises. And what we have them do is they think about their immediate needs, their short-term wants, their long-term wants. And it doesn't seem related to money in the moment, but it gets them thinking about their goals so they can apply, again, all of these pieces, all of this education to themselves. And what they do is they realize that they have their needs. Once they attach numbers to them, if they don't take care of them right away, then they have a problem with basic issues: food, clothing, getting from their apartment to campus, staying in their apartment. We've had student athletes getting evicted because they get the money, you know, from cost of attendance and their stipends. They're off campus, so they're getting the money for housing, and they're not prioritizing spending it on rent. So we see that now, again, with a tiny part of the population of the student athletes. And we know as all these student athletes start making money, they're going to all be faced with the same decisions. So critical that we get to them to talk to them about budgeting and help them do it in an effective and efficient way so it doesn't distract them. Taxes, obviously, they're going to need to pay taxes on this income that's coming in from their NIL activities. They're going to need to understand that if they do an activity for something in kind, they are going to have to value that in kind compensation and pay taxes on it. They're also going to have to remember they have to pay taxes by the time April comes around. They're going to have to set aside the money for taxes. Most of them will be 1099 independent contractors. They're not going to have withholdings. So all of these things, and really what we want to make sure is once those brands are built and they have the tools that are helping them analyze the metrics of social media and making decisions about posts and other content they want to put out there or products they want to sell, we don't want to see this student athlete working so hard with the tools that they've been afforded to build this brand to all of a sudden have it become worthless because they don't know how to manage their money, or they haven't paid taxes, or they're distracted with either incoming calls because they're getting so much press and they're so popular, or distracted with tax issues, et cetera, et cetera. We also want to make sure that those who are eligible for Pell Grants, federal aid, understand the income breakpoints, at which point they will no longer be eligible. So those are the kinds of things that, again, no matter what the regulations are, they need to learn, and we know they need to learn it now because we've had the experience on campus with student athletes already. So now that we've taken you through that decision-making, due diligence, money, hopefully you see a little bit of how it all feeds into each other. That goal-setting piece is so important. We need to make sure that they're taking all of those tools and applying it to the contracts they will be required to sign to enter into these engagements. So Luke, you want to talk about contracts?
I would love to talk about contracts. So, you know, the last part of DDMC is contracts and understanding contracts. And this is a critical component of name, image, and likeness education, because at the end of the day, they're going to be asked to sign or agree to various terms, and they need to just understand that. And the bottom line is that a lot of times student athletes have never seen a contract before, or they haven't seen a marketing contract or a marketing agent contract of an advisor that wants to work with them. And so this idea of talking about contracts, a couple things. One, we would really break it down into two areas and use real world redacted agreements for them to go through, contracts for them to go through, and help walk them through to, one, familiarize them with what a contract looks like, and then two, to highlight some of the important sections that they need to understand. And we're going to highlight a few of them here for you to just get a sense. But as you can imagine, there are a lot of ways in which student athletes could get tripped up through a lack of understanding of the contracts that they're being asked to sign. And I've seen it so many times, time and time again, where an agent, a marketing agent, says to them, hey, these are my standard contracts. Everybody I work with signs these, right? Well, that's great that that's what other people do. But student athletes will have to understand, hey, they can negotiate anything in a contract, right? They can get through that. So ideally, they would understand, and we'd get them to understand some of these key components to work through, to know what to look out for. This isn't to make them, sports lawyers, contract lawyers, although, one of the added benefits to this curriculum is it exposes them to other careers that they could have potentially in sports after they graduate. But it's to give them a sense of saying, hitting the pause button. All right. So somebody puts a contract in front of you. Great. I don't need to sign it right now. I'm going to take this back. I'm going to look at it and I'll get back to you. Right. And whether they then go through it themselves or they, have someone else go through it, at least it presses the pause button to say, I want to understand certain aspects. So what are those certain aspects? One is scope of services. So whether you're talking about a contract with a marketing advisor who's trying to work with a student athlete, or a marketing opportunity itself, it's important to understand what's the scope of services, right? And so again, going through a contract and helping them understand that the scope of services is basically when an advisor, a marketing advisor, says to you, hey, this is everything that I'm going to do for you. You need to understand that. Because if what you need or what you think you need is not what they're offering, it doesn't matter how much you like them, that can end the conversation right there. But then also it helps you if you're thinking about a name, image, and likeness opportunity. The scope of services is talking about what is it that I, as a student athlete, what do I have to do? So do I have to show up somewhere? Am I showing up for a photo shoot or a video shoot? Am I simply, putting out social media posts? And if so, what social media posts? What obligations do I have? What services am I providing to that particular brand? So understanding the scope of services and using real world examples helps student athletes kind of have that aha moment of, okay, I know somebody kind of told me I have to do certain things and I'm going to get paid to do it. But now this is where the rubber hits the road and I can actually see what's required of me, or how can I hold someone else accountable who wants to work with me? Then it's fees, right? The money portion. And this is where, Courtney talked about money. She talked about, the fact that most of this is going to be 1099. It's going to be gross that they're going to receive. So this is where you start to understand, how do the fees work here? So if it's an advisor contract, what is it that I'm paying them, right? What is it that they're making off of me? So when I think about the services that they're providing, does what they're charging me or how they're charging me, do those two things align? And helping student athletes understand how that works. But then also, what's their compensation that they're receiving if they do a name, image, and likeness opportunity? If they have the opportunity to go, be a social media influencer for a particular brand, make some social media posts, right? What are they getting compensated to do that? And there will be language in most contracts that'll tell them that they're doing it as an independent contractor, that nothing's going to be withheld in terms of taxes. But again, this is how all of these pieces start to tie back in together. Then we're also going to look at the term. And this is so important when we think about student athletes. The term is how long this contract is in place for. So if I'm a student athlete and I'm considering having a marketing advisor help identify deals and opportunities for me, the term is really important. Are they looking, if I'm an elite athlete that has a chance to play professionally, is their term so long that it ties me into when I make that transition into the pros potentially, right? So are we talking about a term of 1 year, 2 years, 3 years and beyond? Understanding that aspect is going to be important as they think about the contracts that are getting put in front of them, right? And then along with that is understanding the termination, right? So okay, if the term is 2 years, but I have flexibility to terminate quickly, then that's how those pieces kind of work together. But termination, I mean, listen, we've seen lawsuits around it. Most recently, one of the more famous lawsuits of Zion Williamson and the agreement that he signed. There was the legal argument that ultimately was just recently resolved was around whether or not they had the right language, appropriate language in the contract as it relates to, an advisor, an agent, right? But there's also a piece when you looked at that contract where his termination was incredibly challenging, a super high hurdle, right? And we all know, you all deal with student athletes every single day. And so we know how frequently young people change their minds and want to, maybe they start working with somebody, but they want the flexibility to kind of break away, right? So understanding termination is so important as they go through their decision-making process and due diligence around the people that they potentially want to work with. Ultimately, the rubber hits the road right here in the contract itself. But also termination is important when it comes to the name, image, and likeness opportunities that present themselves. So what happens if I agreed to do this, so many appearances with a local on-campus pizza place after certain games or what have you. But you know what? I don't really like that pizza anymore. I don't want to do it anymore. I think I could do bigger and better things, so I don't want to do it. Okay, well, you've signed a contract. So what are you required, right? What happens if you breach that contract or if you try to terminate early? What are the ramifications of that? So understanding that this is a business, these are business, contracts that student athletes are getting engaged in. And so that's what we want to make sure that they fully understand. So again, that, in a nutshell, that's contracts, but we use real contracts. We answer their questions as we go through it and look at real situations that have been unfortunate outcomes that athletes have been involved with when they've signed these contracts, to really drive home the importance of their decision-making, their due diligence, and understanding of how they are making money as they look to be able to make these decisions. So in a big nutshell, and I see Lauren coming on, which means we must have questions and comments. To show you the picture, all of these pieces fit together, from decision-making, due diligence, money, and contracts, because they all impact each other in different ways. So with that, let's take a pause, answer some questions, answer some comments.
Okay, so we have a question. You mentioned the legislation doesn't matter. What implementation timeline are you suggesting to athletic departments you're currently working with in order to have student athletes prepared by the August 1st, 2021 NIL start date?
Yeah.
So the legislation ultimately will matter very much. So yes. Sorry for the confusion. I meant more the timing of the legislation, meaning it doesn't matter what the ultimate rules are, this education is necessary. So schools that we're working with now, we're kicking off workshops in February. So if you think of the DDMC, February, March, decision-making and due diligence, March, April, due diligence, money, April, May, money contracts. We have breakout sessions and some on-demand one-on-one work as they go through the summer. So the idea being that hopefully by the end of spring semester, they've been exposed to all four pieces. When there are regulations to talk about, and each of the school's compliance groups have determined what their individual school regulations are going to be, we can then step in and either alongside compliance or taking direction from compliance, we can also run workshops about those. So never too late, but the sooner the better for sure. We want them thinking about this stuff ahead of time. We want them to anticipate that they're going to have decisions to make, that they're going to have people coming at them, that they're going to need to review information, they're going to need to manage their time, they're going to take a look at themselves and their goals and decide, do they even really want to participate in this? Because it's a lot of responsibility, versus the opposite, where NIL hits, it's new, it's exciting, they can build their brand, go, and they don't have all of the other information they need to make sure they protect themselves, protect that brand, and most importantly, protect their two most important roles as student and athlete.
Yeah, and just to add to that, and Courtney mentioned it, the idea of once we know what the final rules are, right, from the NCAA and or federal legislation from Congress, when we have that, we can work with compliance. So just like DDMC, you see the 4 parts of the core curriculum. It just like Courtney said, we can also work with you in your institution to be able to help student athletes understand the why behind the rules, in terms of why do these rules protect me, right? Like how can I make smart decisions, informed decisions, and be protected by adhering to these rules? Because clearly there's a compliance piece, to the rules and having student athletes having to follow the rules. Got it. But the other aspect that comes in that we've had conversations around is when the rules come out, some of it is going to be important to make it real for the student athletes so that they understand that these rules are in place in a way that can protect them, so that they can understand that as they're going through the process of understanding kind of how they're going to engage in name, image, and likeness opportunities.
There's also another question that popped up. How do your services fit into the education that we will be getting from our branding company?
So we just in general, in terms of pre-existing education, I referenced this a little bit earlier. We work with each institution to understand what resources they have in place and make sure that we're not duplicating efforts. So in the case of a brand building or brand building and monetization platform that a school might have in place, we'll make sure, we know there's varying degrees of education that those platforms offer. We'll make sure we're not duplicating. So that would include, not just looking at the course title, but looking at the content and making sure that we're getting everything that student athlete needs. Frequently, we'll see people talking about financial literacy. It's such a broad term. Because of our experience in our respective careers, we understand exactly what tools these student athletes need at this point in time in the financial literacy space. There's a little bit of a danger in bringing in too much general information in that it can be overwhelming and also just not apply to the here and now. The other thing I should mention, which we haven't really talked about, and some of you are familiar with, our methodology, how we run these workshops. We are keenly aware that even pre-COVID, it's very hard to keep students, forget athletes, but students' attention, especially at these ages, and especially student athletes who are so used to making those quick decisions. So our entire curricula has been developed around making sure we're meeting those student athletes where they are, keeping it interesting and keeping it engaging. And we've had, for those of you who've worked with us post-COVID, you know that we have moved the techniques that we would do in person onto the e-learning platforms, our workshop platforms, to keep them engaged. So we have them practicing the concepts before they've even learned them, 2 or 3 minutes into the workshops. So it's not only we'll not only make sure that we don't duplicate content, but it's a very different way of delivering it. The micro learning sessions we offer are for follow on and follow up to make sure that that knowledge has actually been absorbed, that it's getting reinforced, that they're putting it into practice.
Yeah. And Courtney and I, over this past year plus, have had, the opportunity to be on plenty of panels and build relationships with so many of the kind of brand platforms. And I think, as you have conversations with them, a lot of times they'll talk about their education and what their education entails. And in certain instances, it really focuses on helping student athletes understand how to best commercialize and develop and grow their brand. And that's most definitely important, because student athletes, they want to know that. They want to know, and I'm sure you've dealt with those questions of how can I build a more valuable social media presence and things along those lines. Our education is just different, and our education is based on kind of what our core competency professionally has been, which is being able to deliver that education that really focuses on the protection of student athletes. So kind of thinking through that aspect is important. Thinking through the fact that we can kind of plug and play, as Courtney mentioned, into the platforms that you may already be partnered with, or that you may be considering partnering with. What we deliver is content, educational content, and we'll work with you to determine how best to deliver that content, whether it's through our own platform, whether it's through a platform that you already have, internally, or whether it's through a third party that you're working with from a technology perspective. So very easy to do that. The one thing that I'll add as well that comes from all this is the entrepreneurship aspect. And that's kind of part of the underlying current across all of these areas of DDMC that we've talked about, that we haven't explicitly said. Because there may be student athletes who have the opportunity to develop their brand because of their athletic performance and their athletic abilities. And you already know that there are student athletes that you have who are going to be able to either come in with a developed brand or develop their brand while in school because of other non-sports related opportunities that they have. Business ideas, the ability to market or sell products or services. And it's that entrepreneurship education that's also critical Because ultimately, when they think about how do they either develop their own business, help promote a family business or grow a family business, it's those aspects that this education is going to be so critical to help as well. So again, I don't want to belabor the point, but it's just such an important point that you may have those relationships already with brand folks, and that education is important, and this education is important as well for your student athletes.
We have another question. It is, do you work with in conjunction with resources that we already have on campus, like business school or law school?
Yeah. I'll jump in on that one. So just like Courtney said earlier, that's where we do the assessment to really understand what resources do you already have in play. And I think, and this is, I'm sure you all are thinking about this, but I think that the academic schools and colleges that you have within your institutions are going to play an important role in all of this, right? Because if you think about it, name, image, and likeness could, hopefully one of the positive outcomes of this is that it causes student athletes to have a desire to want to learn more. So on the one hand, you could think about what curriculum, like what classes and coursework do we have available within our organization across the different schools of our institution that can help student athletes as they develop and can be almost become a NIL academic education pathway for them, let's say, right? So thinking about classes like marketing, business or corporate finance, understanding digital storytelling and things along those lines. That's a great way to incorporate, the academic side of things into the equation. But the other piece too, that can help make this real is we would love to, if you have us come in and work with your organization, we would love to have those conversations with either if it's the faculty advisor to your athletic department, or whether it's individual professors that may have classes or can bring the academic perspective in. Like Courtney and I won't hide it, right? We are real world practical education based on what we've seen, what we deal with, and how we know that student athletes need that help. But when you also bring in that academic perspective, that's pretty powerful. And maybe that also helps when we know that, 98% of student athletes are not going to go play professionally when they're done. They're going to go enter the workforce or go on to grad school. And so to be able to have that understanding from an academic and real world perspective could hopefully, help catapult them into career options, grad school options when they're done with their undergrad studies. So yes, I think that's probably the short answer to the question. Yes, we can definitely work with your academic folks.
Lauren, if we have other questions, just pop on. But I did want to talk a little bit more about not just working with everybody else, in concert with everybody on campus, but also that timing, because I was thinking about it. We know that all of those student athletes who want to participate, who have access to the branding resources, are curating their content now. So they're preparing, they're ready to go. And that's great, it gives them practice. But since we know they're already doing that and they're ready to go, we want to make sure that they have the layer of the education over that curating of their brand so that they can be thinking very strategically. And when the start button gets hit, that they can immediately immerse themselves in taking that curated brand, that curated content, posting it, and immediately knowing the implications of what that is, their responsibilities around that. They've looked at contracts, they know what to do with their money, so that they're not missing classes or practices or anything else, that they're able to just continue seamlessly as NIL starts. So important part about timing.
As soon as you asked about having contributing questions and me popping back on, one popped up. Is there any future plans for this education to be put into a standard kind of 101 type of class that could be offered for non-student athletes, but students just interested in working in the sports field?
Absolutely. It's you're singing our song. We recognize that every student needs this practical education. We have targeted the athlete space for all the obvious reasons, first professional and now the student athletes, but so many students who want to get into the sports field. We mentor some that we work with now who are not athletes for their schools, but they're in either the business school looking to ultimately become an agent or a marketing rep or work for a team. All of those managers that work with teams now. So the goal is absolutely to get this content into some sort of 101 format for those who want to go into the sports industry, and hopefully ultimately get it to kind of the practical application of all of this for all students should they want to engage in it. One of the things that brought us to the collegiate space was after working with professional athletes for so long. When we started consulting with them, when I released my licenses and started consulting with professional athletes and giving them these services of education and due diligence, I got consistent feedback. I wish I had this sooner. I wish I had this sooner. And Luke, working with his athletes, his professional athletes and their contracts, that's really how we even moved into the collegiate space. So we know there's a need. We also know when we see professional athletes, we have professional athletes we work with who are really, really, really smart and have graduated from excellent academic institutions, economics degree, finance degree. Each and every one of them has a difficult time relating all of those academic concepts to their personal life. So if you think of, academia and kind of if there's a gap, this is the gap that we are helping them to fill. But also while we're helping them fill that gap, learn how to practically apply it, they also then have those processes for the rest of their life they can apply everywhere.
Yeah. So real quick, I just want to add one thing, and then we can definitely take your question, Lauren, and maybe we can have a quick 2 or 3 minutes to go through one scenario just to help you understand how all this fits together. But one thing I'll mention briefly is I don't think we've talked enough about your staff and athletic department staff. And this DDMC education, I think, is just as critical and just as important for the athletic administration staff and coaches, because you all are the first kind of line of defense oftentimes that athletes will go to ask questions. And one of the things that we do know, and especially from a legal and liability perspective, you're not going to be able to tell them, yes, go with this person, or no, go with that person, or yes, take this deal, or no, don't take this deal. But what you can do is you can encourage them to stick with their process and their learning. And if with education around decision-making, around due diligence, right, putting processes in place to have a repeatable, standardized process for how they deal with this, when your staff, when coaches get this learning, then they're able to reinforce the process for student athletes as they go through it. So just wanted to make sure to highlight that as well. If we could real quick, Courtney, I think it's important maybe to just share 2 or 3 quick minutes on this scenario that we talked about around how we make this real, and then we'll take any kind of final questions as we wrap up if that makes sense. But do you want to go ahead and kind of maybe share a scenario?
Sure. Anybody who's listened to me talk about NIL knows that one of the major focal points I've been trying to get across is the fact that NIL is going to impact every student athlete, not just the, there will be a very small percentage who make a lot of money from it, but every student athlete has the opportunity to make money from it. And this young lady, Chloe Mitchell, is such a great example of how this can happen. NAIA obviously went live, I think September. She is a really interesting story. So this speaks to how these athletes have talents in all places of their life. So it was the pandemic. She was in quarantine. She knew she was going to play volleyball at Aquinas in the fall. She decided she wanted to convert her parents' garage into a she shed, started doing do-it-yourself videos. And all of a sudden, she had 1.2 million followers on TikTok. Now, she is fortunate in that she has a great circle of advisors around her, not the least of which is her father, who was a tight end at Michigan 30 years ago. And there was a story I read about, I assume it's true, that he actually won a car on Price is Right. And he was nervous about taking the car because of eligibility rules, which were nowhere near as strict as they are today. And I think they ultimately ended up titling it in his brother's name. But point being, here's a father who's been hyper aware of this issue his entire adult life. So he was able to guide her. I mean, she literally went from, I think, 5,000 Instagram followers to 1.2 million TikTok followers, and then realized she can leverage this to sell product. She's selling golf clubs. She's making real money. And through her network and her parents' network, she was able to put together a great group of advisors. They launched a platform, and it seems like it's going very, very well. But I love to use this example because, number one, we always think of the top tier names, those names that we think we're going to see go 1, 2, 3, 4 in the draft, next draft for the NFL or the NBA. We think of those names as the moneymakers. But we don't talk about, my other favorite thing to talk about is either the D3 field hockey player in Western Pennsylvania who's going to be a hometown hero, or, the UCLA women's gymnastics team that's valued at $1.25 million. These athletes are all going to have opportunities. And we know they don't all have the good fortune of having the team that Chloe Mitchell has around her. And we also know that some of the athletes that we least expect to participate are going to jump into this in a huge way. So I just think, as you're all thinking about your athletes, what you think they're up against, what might be happening when you're out on the recruiting trail, and talking about how important it is to make sure that you're guiding them with their branding piece, it could be very compelling to be talking to prospective students and their parents about the protection that you're going to afford them and the lessons that they will leave when they graduate with to apply to all major decisions for the rest of their life.
Yeah, so when you think about this, and just kind of going back to DDMC, and you think about Chloe and kind of everything happening, or someone like her, right, that are one of your, or a handful or many of your student athletes who may have these kind of opportunities. Think of all the decisions that had to be made, that she went through, of all the different people who wanted to work with her or leverage the opportunity, of going to, over 1 million TikTok followers, and that's a big deal. I mean, I'm on TikTok only so I can understand the platform, but 1 million followers on any platform is a big deal. And people want to monetize that for us. So the opportunities that get presented, the people who want to work with her, first, there's some decisions that have to be made, but then it's due diligence of understanding, who are these people that want to work with me? Like, how does this fit in? Like, how do I understand what's their background? How do I analyze that and understand that? But then the money piece, right? And how am I going to manage? How does this all fit in? And how am I going to manage this? And ultimately with contracts, what am I being asked to sign? What's getting put in front of me? Right. So when you think about that with a real, and you could think of a student athlete who's, already at your institution, who may have opportunities similar or somewhat like this, you can think about that from the perspective of how understanding a process for decision-making, for due diligence, for understanding money, and not just financial literacy, but understanding, like Courtney talked about earlier, the money aspect of everything that's being presented to them in taxes and financial aid and all of those issues, right? And then contracts and understanding that aspect. This curriculum is a real world curriculum for the challenges that we know your student athletes are going to face. So with that, Lauren, I don't know if we had any final questions that we want to kind of take on in the last 5 minutes that we have.
Yes, we do. Hold on 1 second. It was, do you guys offer one-on-one or small group sessions? We're not really sure how many of our student athletes will be participating in NIL, so we're trying to coordinate that. Additionally, other than your virtual programs and your online sessions, how else can the kids be learning about this?
So we absolutely have follow-up. So when we do a workshop, we always have, when I say a workshop, it's the initial group working session. And then it's also a group of follow-on small group sessions and or one-on-one, we call it on demand. It could be office hours. So we work with the institution around number of student athletes, number that can be in any one place at any one given time. Frequently, there'll be programs that want just one team because they feel like that's how the student athletes are going to get the best benefit out of it. And then others will mix sports. So we accommodate all that according to schedule, and we build in follow-up group sessions. And then with the ongoing, I mentioned it before, the micro learning. So those will be 3 to 5, 5 to 7 minute quick segments on an app. We have gamification built into it. This is if you were to use our app. You know, there's a leaderboard, so they're all very competitive, obviously, and they can see who's done the follow-up on taxes or who's done the follow-up on decision making. And so we try to keep them engaged and interested and keep all of that content coming back to them and reminding them. So, you know, depending on how many student athletes and scheduling, that will dictate the number of workshops. We also are working with schools because none of them know how many are going to participate. So what a lot of schools are doing is saying, all right, we're going to make one workshop in each of these categories mandatory for everybody. They need to know at least a little bit about decision-making, due diligence, money, and contracts, period. And then as the groups get smaller, as some student athletes opt out, as some of them may decide to be on a platform where they are engaging in standard contracts. So maybe they don't need as much contract information. We'll be doing deeper dives in the information, and we will accommodate the number of workshops that are needed from there.
Absolutely. I can always add more, but I'm going to pause to see if we have another question. Lauren, I want to make sure that we get to all the questions that we have in the last 2 minutes that we have.
I don't see any right now.
Okay.
Perfect. So yeah, I think that's great. The one thing I would add to what Courtney mentioned is, I think the last part of that last question was around other ways, you know, other options for, you know, learning for student athletes. And that's where I think, you know, both of us, you know, think about the holistic athlete and life beyond sports, right? Both from their identity and their understanding of their own identity, but also, you know, business opportunities and growing their, you know, professional ideas of what they might want to do. So we will also share other resources. So whether it's periodicals and magazines, books, other ways in which they can think about expanding their knowledge and understanding. And sometimes that's through networking, right? So, you know, when you start to make it real to student athletes around, hey, we have these opportunities where you can meet with local professionals or, you know, other alumni and things along those lines. We reinforce that, and we want to understand your themes that you're sharing with student athletes so that we can reinforce that through this, because that can help them as they develop their career.
No question. And just real quick, one thing we didn't touch on, but it's been a big, big conversation with a lot of student athletes is as they build out that brand, the causes they care about and supporting, whether it be communities or specific social causes. You know, we teach them when they are, you know, when they go through that goal setting exercise, what do they care about? How to plan for supporting those groups, whether it be financially or just making time for them. to the networking piece, to find representatives of the different groups in the community. We're on such a great momentum shift of all the social justice issues. And we've talked to so many student athletes who want to keep that going. They want their voice heard. So we make sure that we bring all of that in. Yeah.
So with that was perfect timing, Courtney. Literally, the clock just changed to 5 o'clock. So.
Well-oiled machine.
So listen, thank you so much for joining us. Please do feel free to reach out to either Courtney or myself if you have any follow-on questions, if you want to discuss it more, if you'd like to have kind of a one-on-one conversation with your name, image, and likeness task force at your institution, whatever we can do to help you so that you can continue to extend this runway as long as possible for preparing your student athletes for what we know is coming. We'd be happy to talk with you even more.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Luke. Always good to see you.
You too, Courtney. Enjoy your day, everybody.